They say silence can kill relationships faster than lies ever could, and that's exactly what happened to me. One day, she was the person I couldn't go an hour without talking to, and then she became the person who made me feel like my love was a burden. I never thought that someone I cared about this deeply would look me in the eyes, or text me, and say, "Stop being so needy, I'll text you when I feel like it." That one sentence hit like a punch to the chest, but instead of begging her to stay, I replied with just one word, and that word ended everything. You ever love someone so much that you start losing pieces of yourself just to keep them happy? That's where I was. I thought giving more, waiting longer, and loving harder would fix everything, but it didn't. It only made me invisible. What I learned next, and how everything changed after that one message, still echoes in my mind today. Because sometimes the strongest thing you'll ever say in love is no. When we first met, she felt like light, not the noisy, showy kind, but the kind of light that settles into the cracks of your day and makes everything look softer. We met in one of those moments that seemed small at the time but later feels like destiny, a mutual friend's house party. Rain thudding against the windows, music that blurred into background warmth. She laughed at something I said, a small, unaffected laugh, and I remember thinking, that laugh could change my whole week. Our conversations stretched like the rubber bands of two people who had time to explore each other, favorite books, stupid childhood stories, the little anxieties we pretended were jokes. By the end of the night, we were already planning coffee dates and long walks. It all moved fast enough to be thrilling but slow enough to feel natural. Those early weeks were intoxicating. We had this shorthand, little jokes, nicknames, the way she'd text a single emoji that would make me smile for 10 minutes. We spent weekends driving with the windows down, music loud and stupid and perfect. We learned each other's odd habits and loved them anyway. I would come home feeling like my day had been catalyzed by her presence. When I think back now, it's easy to romanticize those moments, to let memory gloss over the parts that later frayed, but they were real, and they mattered. They were what made the unraveling sting more. At first, the changes were tiny, a missed call here, a slow reply there. The excuses were believable, work, family stuff, stress. I wanted to be patient, the kind of partner who trusts and gives space. I told myself I wasn't clingy, I was considerate, but a pattern crept in, so subtle that I mistook it for normal life. Texts that used to flow into late-night conversations became single-line responses. Plans were tentative more often than not. When she did reply, it was sometimes brusque, sometimes distant. There were nights I'd scroll through our old messages, wondering where the warmth had gone, convincing myself that love isn't constant fireworks, it's okay for the flame to be low. Maybe I was asking for too much, I thought. Maybe my needs were unreasonable. What I didn't see then was the disguise of indifference wearing itself as strength. She would say things like, "I value my independence," and I would admire that, thinking independence was admirable and healthy. But independence becomes a problem when it's wielded to avoid responsibility. When "I'll text you when I feel like it" becomes not a statement of self-possession but a dismissal of someone else's feelings. The line between being independent and being indifferent blurs. I tried to be the opposite of needy, supportive, patient, understanding. I told myself that if I gave her the space she wanted, she'd come back when she was ready. Instead, what came back was colder, shorter, and less engaged. One afternoon, after a string of radio silence that lasted most of the day, I sent a simple message, "Are we okay? You've been really quiet." It was an honest, not accusatory check-in. What she replied was a sentence that felt like a blade disguised as a shrug. "Stop being so needy. I'll text you when I feel like it." Simple, sharp, unapologetic. My chest tightened in a way that surprised me, not because her words were sharp, but because they were final. There was no invitation for conversation, no offer to explain, just an announcement that my concerns were her inconvenience. I stared at the screen a long time. In that silence, I heard every late-night worry and every clumsy attempt at reassurance I'd wasted. I thought about all the times I swallowed discomfort to avoid making her feel pressured. I thought about the string of little humiliations that had built up between us, the cancelled plans without rescheduling, the way she could forget to be present, the times I'd absent-mindedly check my phone hoping for a sign that I mattered. I could have typed a long message, poured out memories and pleading like some tragic lover in a movie. I could have asked why, or begged her to care, but something inside me had been accumulating for months, and it reached a breaking point in those two words, "Stop being so needy." I replied with one word, "No." It felt small in the typing, but enormous in consequence. Not a dramatic paragraph, not a fight, just a compact refusal to participate in the game she was playing. No meant many things packed into a single syllable. No meant I would not accept being minimized. No meant I wouldn't let someone else define my worth by the frequency of their texts. No meant I was choosing dignity over desperation. After I sent it, a strange serenity settled. I locked my phone, which, given my previous habit of obsessively checking for a response, felt like stepping out of a trance. Sleep came easier that night than it had in weeks. The next morning, as if on cue, Her tone returned not as vulnerability but as scorn. Wow, really? You're acting like a child. That was followed by calls I did not answer. Messages that tried to manufacture guilt by referencing the past. After everything? She typed, as if history had made a binding contract. I read them and felt the old pull, that ache of wanting to explain myself, to show how hurt I was, but I kept my silence. The dynamic had been clear long before that text. Answering would be agreeing to the terms she already set. She tried the usual maneuvers afterward. There were periods of charm, moments where she'd casually drop back into the kind of affection that had once felt effortless. You free tonight? She texted one evening. The words aimed to recreate normalcy. It was tempting. Old habits are gym equipment for the emotional muscles you've built over years, and I caught myself almost giving in. But doing so would have meant erasing the boundary I'd set and re-entering a relationship where my feelings were contingent on her mood. So I said no again, sometimes directly, sometimes with silence. It was painful in a pragmatic way. Relationships are built through shared time, and no meant I was surrendering the possibility of reconciliation, but no also meant I was not surrendering my sense of self. The days after my one-word reply taught me more about myself than the months before had. I started spending time doing things I'd abandoned, playing the guitar again, meeting friends I had let drift, resurrecting a novel I'd started years earlier. Those small acts felt like reclaiming parts of me that had been outsourced to a relationship that demanded my presence only when convenient. There were nights of weakness. Of course, I caught myself scrolling through old photos, rereading messages, replaying conversations to find a moment I might have missed or a place I could have done better. That's the cruelty of love. It shows you both your best and your worst, and you get to choose which parts you want to keep. Friends noticed the shift before I did. You seem lighter, one said, and it surprised me how true it sounded. The absence of constant expectation is a kind of relief you don't know you needed until it's there. It's like finally taking off shoes that have been pinching for months. At first you miss the feeling of something on your feet, but soon you realize you can walk farther and breathe easier without them. I started to see my life with new perspective. The same life but with the unbearable fog lifted. The silence that followed her attempts to reinsert herself felt less like emptiness and more like space to breathe, think, and grow. Months later, at a mutual friend's small gathering, I saw her again. She looked surprised to see me, and for the first time since that message, I felt genuinely indifferent rather than wounded. We spoke briefly, the kind of small talk people use to fill social veneers. She smiled and said, "You've really changed." For a moment I considered giving her the satisfaction of showing how much she'd hurt me. Instead I smiled and said nothing complicated, because nothing complicated needed saying. It felt like closure, not because she apologized or because we had an epic conversation, but because I had already moved past needing one. Saying no had not been an act of cruelty, it had been an act of preservation. I learned that people will treat you the way they are comfortable treating you, and the only way to change that is to change how you respond. If you accept scraps, you'll live on scraps. If you demand to be seen and still get ignored, the harsh truth is that sometimes the person in front of you will never be able to meet you. That's not always anyone's fault. Sometimes it's a mismatch of emotional capacity. Sometimes it's fear disguised as aloofness. Sometimes it's simply self-centeredness. But recognizing that mismatch and responding to it with honesty is a kind of honesty you owe to yourself. I don't pretend I was perfect in the relationship. I had my own insecurities and patterns that made me more vulnerable to being used as an occasional source of validation. I had moments where my neediness was real and unhelpful, where I sought assurances instead of growing inner confidence. But there's a difference between asking for reassurance and being dismissed for it. Reassurance is a two-way street in a functioning relationship. Indifference is a one-way dead end. The hardest lesson was accepting that some people aren't built for reciprocity in the way you need it, and that's okay, painful, but okay. There were practical changes, too. I stopped rearranging my schedule around hope. I stopped crafting elaborate plans in my mind to win her back. I returned to routines that fed rather than depleted me, morning runs that cleared my head, cooking meals that tasted like something I made for myself, conversations with friends that didn't require decoding. The mental bandwidth that had been spent checking messages and analyzing tone found new uses, and slowly the anxiety that had lived in my chest began to dissolve. It wasn't overnight. Breakups and boundary setting are messy and nonlinear. There were days when a certain song would hit and the ache would rush back, like a tide pulling at an exposed shoreline, but the tide receded more quickly each time. I learned to redefine what strength looked like, too. It wasn't the cool indifference she showed when she dismissed me as needy. It wasn't the power of making someone wait to prove their worth. Strength, I discovered, was quiet. It was the courage to say no without spectacle. It was the humility to walk away without drama. It was the discipline to choose growth over comfort and dignity over desperation. Saying no is not a rejection of love. It's a recognition that love must be mutual to sustain itself. Looking back, the relationship had its moments of real, honest connection. I'm not blind to that. But those moments were not enough to sustain a life built on consistent reciprocity. There's an economy to emotional labor, and when the ledger is imbalanced for too long, something has to give. For me, what gave was the idea that I needed to be the one to hold the relationship together. Once I let go of that burden, I found that other parts of me could breathe. If you're reading this and you've ever been told you're too much for wanting basic attention or respect, remember this: wanting to be acknowledged is not a flaw, it's human. There is a difference between being demanding and having standards. The right person will not make you bargain for care. They will offer it without ledgering every kindness. They will listen when you say you need something, and they will meet you more often than you meet them halfway. That one-word reply, no, was not a grand gesture meant to punish. It was an honest, necessary boundary that cleared a path I had been too afraid to see. It started a slow process of reclaiming myself, of choosing to spend my time and energy in places that replenished rather than drained. The aftermath wasn't an immediate Eden. It was messy, full of small relapses and lingering nostalgia. But over time, the clarity that came from standing up for myself proved to be one of the most compassionate things I'd ever done. I don't harbor anger toward her. I don't replay scenes in my head hoping for a different ending. Instead, I hold a quiet gratitude for the lesson embedded in the pain. She taught me how to notice when I was shrinking myself, and saying no taught me how to grow back. Now, when someone asks what changed, I tell them simply, I stopped letting someone else set the terms of my worth. That's not arrogance. It's not hardness. It's a small, honest revolution that begins and ends with how you choose to treat yourself. So if you're stuck in a cycle where your needs are labeled as flaws, if you're tired of being told to wait until someone feels like caring, know that it's okay to say no. It might be the bravest, kindest thing you do for yourself.